Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm reviewing Roland's newest flagship sampling pad, the SPD-SX PRO. Now Roland unveiled the SPD-SX PRO back in September of 2022, so it's not brand new, but it's the first chance I've gotten to get my hands on one. Now the unit has a ton of feature improvements, making it a massive upgrade from the previous generation. Quick note, this video is sponsored by ZZounds. Massive shout out to them for sending out this unit for me to check out. All the gear discussed today will be linked down below in the video description. These are affiliate links, so if you want to help out the channel at no additional cost, check them out at zounds.com. Cool, that's a fun one. Dance. Let's go to lo-fi hip hop. And with most of these, they have loops on the shoulder buttons, and then most of the other stuff you can play with. Let's try 80s magic. Let's talk highlights. There are expanded trigger inputs and audio outputs, customizable LED lights, improved setlist functionality, and the ability to sync backing tracks to the internal click. The SPD-SX PRO features a layout similar to the previous generation model, with most buttons being the same, though there are a few inclusions and removals. Below the LCD screen are 6 buttons instead of the original 3, and the buttons change based on what page you're using. The power button is now a switch in the back, which is a little bit annoying to reach, but I think it will work better than the button on the SPD-SX that was prone to issues. We've got familiar front controls similar to the SPD-SX, but with some additions. The original FX control knobs 1 and 2 are now replaced by a single global effects knob. There are 2 new pad edit knobs next to the master effects knob, allowing you to adjust volume, pitch, and the sample's transient. The LCD screen is a large 4.3-inch color display. It's bright and vibrant with a much higher resolution than we saw on the original model. There's much more information you can see right at a glance. You can add a screensaver if you like, even with a custom image. The display is easy to read, large fonts for kit names. There's also a knob on the right side allowing us for quick kit selection without having to use the arrow pads. And we can press the lower left button here to toggle between the large kit names and more pad information. The triggering on the SPD-SX PRO is fantastic as expected. You can now trigger 2 different samples based on velocity. So if you want to trigger a sample from 0 to 50, you can do it from 50 to 127. It's easy to do. So for example, when we're on the house kit, they have this pre-programmed to where this snare, you can hear a snare triggering and also a clap sound. So that's the sample without the clap, and if you hit it harder, you also get the clap in there. Now the way that they do this is under the pad edit, they have it set up so that layer 2 is only going to fire when the velocity is 127. So basically the loudest that you'll play is the only time that that clap will come out. That's pretty cool. You can do some interesting stuff with this type of layering. The sensitivity on the top shoulder pads is also far improved on the Pro. We've got 8 external pad inputs as opposed to 4 on the previous model. You'll want a few add-ons to fully utilize the SPD-SX Pro's external inputs. First, I'd grab a kick drum trigger. Most of the presets on the SPD-SX Pro already have the kick mapped, so you won't need to make any changes to the stock kits. For testing, I have my kick pad from a cheap HXW electronic drum set. I also tested it with my kick pad from the TD50KS, and both work great. But for those of you looking to get a kick pad, Roland sells one. It's called the KD7. I used to have one, but I lost it during my last move, so I cannot demonstrate it. For additional pads, I usually find tons of them at my local musical round store, but it's just a used music store. You can usually find a lot of these orphaned Roland electronic drum pads, so take a look. The PD-85 pads work great since they're two-zoned. Because the trigger inputs are stereo, you'll need splitter cables if you want to use all 8 trigger inputs, and you might already have one of these lying around if you have the original SPD-SX, but I'll leave a link to these down below in the video description. And you're not limited to only using Roland pads. I've got a Donner pad over here from their latest Backbeat electronic drum kit working with no problems. And you can use all kinds of different drum pads provided they have a 1/4 inch output. There is an input available for a hi-hat or an expression pedal. For testing, I've got an HXW hi-hat pedal from another electronic drum kit that I reviewed, and it's working flawlessly. Roland also sells an electronic hi-hat pedal you can buy, but most E-Kit hi-hat pedals work great, from Alesis to HXW to Donner, you name it. There is no digital hi-hat input as we see on the TD50X, so I couldn't use my VH14D. You can also use an expression pedal to control effects without using your hands, but since I don't have one, kind of hard to show that off. The SPD-SX Pro features 6 independent outputs. You can route audio from anywhere of these 6 channels in mono or stereo. The previous generation SPD-SX only had 2 stereo-linked outputs, which required panning to take advantage of 4 mono outputs, so definitely improvement there. And audio inputs, the SPD-SX Pro has 1/4 inch stereo input, requiring you to use yet another breakout cable for 2 mono signals. This is one downside where the original SPD-SX wins. For USB, you get 12 inputs and 8 outputs, far surpassing the limitations of the previous model, which only had 2 in and 2 out via USB. On the internal storage front, the SPD-SX Pro has 32 gigabytes of internal storage space, completely decimating the previous generation. You don't need to worry about formatting your samples in any specific way. The unit automatically converts WAV files, AIFF, and MP3 files with no issue, no matter the bit rate, no matter the sample rate. The original SPD-SX could only import WAV files at 44.1 16-bit, which was terrible user experience. Finally, 200 kit slots are available on the SPD-SX Pro, much better than the original model with only 100. So let's talk some new features of the SPD-SX Pro. First, we can sync tracks to the internal click. So if you've got backing tracks and loops, we can sync those right to the click. This is a significant upgrade. In the past, you had to hit the loop perfectly in time, and the entire loop would be out of sync if you were a little bit off, especially if that sample is very long too. This feature is super helpful, especially if you want to trigger a loop to start, let's say on beat 1, and your hands need to be in other places on the downbeat, like maybe hitting both crash cymbals. You can start that loop a few beats early and it'll come in perfectly with the click track. The new pad sequencing feature allows you to create multiple track configurations that advance by playing one singular pad. So if you had a intro, verse, chorus, all these types of backing tracks, you can play them in sequential order, hitting the same exact pad. So the set lists upgrade, this is a big one. On the original SPD-SX, we had what was called kit chains, and these were a little clunky, but you could arrange your kits into a set list order for using it live. The downside was you could only have up to 20 kit chains. Now on the SPD-SX Pro, they've revamped it, and they now call it set lists, which can be configured with up to 32 kits. Another big feature we have on the SPD-SX Pro, we are now only talking decibel volumes. There's no convoluted way of discerning volume. The original SPD-SX had volume numbers that went from 1 to 100, which was not helpful at all. So the SPD-SX Pro has all samples in decibel values, so you can communicate easier with the sound engineer if they want you to turn down the snare by 3 dB, no problem. If you need to boost anything easy, right here on the front of the pad, super, super simple. You can also easily adjust sample pitch, fade ins, fade outs, transients right here on these knobs. You also get individual EQ for every layer of every pad. The click track has been revamped. Roland has seriously improved the click track on the SPD-SX Pro. We can now subdivide the click. We can change the click time signature. We can start the click track off a specific pad. There's tons of new features. Also, we have sample delay, which allows us to add a 4-beat click count in without having to rebounce backing tracks, which is awesome for starting songs. You can customize the click sound with a single sample based on what's already in the pad, or you can use a custom loop wave. However, using a custom wave loop will turn off syncing loops and backing tracks to the click. So keep that in mind. Bunch of MIDI improvements as well. When using the SPD-SX Pro as a MIDI controller, you get 3 knobs and the expression pedal to send control changes. There's also more control over the changes you send, including velocities and note lengths. In the MIDI settings, we can see note names in addition to note numbers, which is very useful when working in a digital audio workstation or using drum VST software. When adjusting pad sensitivity, we can now see the real-time monitoring of our triggers, and the pad makes it easy to see the effects of our adjustments in an easy-to-understand format. So the LED lighting is incredible. The customization is awesome. Not only can you make the SPD-SX Pro look cool, but it's also very practical for live situations. For example, on the shoulder buttons, you could have these programmed to be the color red, and all these buttons would do is advance the kit. Now you can still hit the plus and minus buttons here, but when you're playing live and you need to hit to the next kit, it's easier just to hit that. On my original SPD-SX, when we were playing live, I always had this center shoulder button to kill the sound immediately, because if there's an emergency situation where something's happening and we need to stop, it stops the sound, right? So good to have those type of features on this pad, and that's just a suggestion I have. I don't even use the shoulder pads for sampling anything. They're basically controlling the SPD-SX with my sticks instead of having to use my fingers and get in here, you know? It's just another way that I like to do it. Having the ability to like color code where my controls are is huge. Even though I'll probably remember which pads I have programmed, it's nice to have a visual indication. Now, the wave browser is really easy to use, and you can even filter samples by tags, but you have to be careful that you do it deliberately when you tag files, because otherwise you're gonna end up with a big mess and a bunch of tags that mean nothing. But it's a great feature. I also love how we can scrub through longer samples to diagnose issues. Instead of listening through 4 minutes of a long backing track to hear the ending, you can fast forward right to the problem spot, saving you time. The SPD-SX Pro also makes saving, loading, and backing up your settings a lot quicker. And this is a big one. Kits on this unit load extremely fast, especially when compared to the Alesis Strike MultiPad. As far as effects go, there's 53 to choose from. The quality is improved, and there's nice reverbs, great sounding distortion, good saturation, and they've got new effects. There's a lo-fi and a bit crusher, which are really cool sounding. And for sampling, all you have to do is run any sort of audio source right into the stereo input here, and you can sample it in real time and then assign it to any pad. For most of the video, we've talked about the new pad compared to the SPD-SX, the previous generation, but what about comparing it to the Strike MultiPad? Both of these pads look super similar, and they both feel great to play. The Alesis kits take a lot longer to load than the SPD-SX Pro, but the Strike MultiPad has way better looping capability. However, they lose out on sample import. Roland has an incredible desktop app for adding sounds via USB. It's so easy to add sounds to any user kit. All I had to do, it took me 5 minutes to basically reprogram what I had in my SPD-SX onto the new one just by dragging and dropping my folder of samples that I always use. With the Strike MultiPad, you have to import via the USB memory from what I remember, and there's no software solution that lets you just use a USB cable and just start dragging and dropping sounds right to the pad. So Roland wins on importing sounds for sure. There is no headphone jack on the front of the SPD-SX Pro like we see here. On the Strike MultiPad, there's only a 1/4 inch phone output in the back, so you'll need an adapter, which is not included. So the Strike MultiPad, you've got a 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch, so you don't need the adapter here. The LED lights on the SPD-SX Pro display limited information in comparison to the Strike MultiPad. When you play a loop on the SX Pro, it's not gonna give you a time indicator of how much loop is left. On the Strike MultiPad, it gives you a playback bar of how far along you are in the loop, which is a huge feature. So you don't get that on the SX Pro. Now, the sounds in the Strike MultiPad are far better than the sounds included on the SPD-SX Pro. Just my opinion, but I just feel like the snares, the toms, all the stuff, all the acoustic kind of sounds are way better in this unit. The SX Pro has a ton of cool sounds, but the drum kit sounds themselves are lacking, which might not be a big deal, especially if you're using this in addition to your acoustic kit. I just feel like sometimes these sounds are lacking a little bit. Overall, both of these pads are solid, but Alesis wins on looping and sounds, while Roland wins on inputs, outputs, and features. One thing I forgot to mention, the Alesis Strike MultiPad is half the price of the SX Pro, so keep that in mind. So, who should upgrade? If you have the original SPD-SX or any other electronic drum pad, you might not need to upgrade if you only use your pad in specific situations. Drummers who rely on a sampling pad as a MIDI controller like me will not need to upgrade to the new Roland unit, provided your pad is still in working order, of course. Drummers who want more internal storage space will benefit. The massive 32GB internal storage is a big step up from the previous generation, and the additional trigger inputs offer much more flexibility, especially for drummers who want to incorporate electronic percussion into their acoustic kit and just add a ton of electronic drum pads around them. I love big drum sets. I don't blame people for it, so go nuts. The SPD-SX Pro has tons of extra features. Syncing loops and backing tracks to the internal click is really helpful for gigging musicians, especially if they do all the heavy lifting on the unit itself and not a laptop computer. The workflow is a lot faster and much easier, but this is also the most expensive drum sampling pad on the market. So let me know what you guys think of the SPD-SX Pro down below in the comments. Thank you once again to ZZounds for sponsoring the video. Be sure to check out the links in the description. Hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I will see you all in the next video.